Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning into this episode of the Why I Left podcast. In today's episode, I chat with Ashley Bince. Ashley is the founder and managing attorney of Bince Law. After working in big law for several years, she recognized that she lacked fulfillment and the space really wasn't for her. So she launched her own firm and found it to be more personally and professionally rewarding than she could have ever imagined. It was great to hear how patient she was in finding her niche and how much she trusted the process along the way. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Ashley Bince. Ashley is a trademark lawyer who helps small businesses secure and protect their intellectual property rights. Now, after working in big law, she founded her own firm to serve leaders who are passionate about affecting positive change and helping business owners realize their dreams. So hi, Ashley, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brian. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Appreciate you joining. And so, this is a very exciting episode for me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. But before we chat about how you got involved in the Great Resignation, twice over, I noticed, tell us a little bit about, your background and where you call home.
Sure. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, originally born and raised, first generation American. My mom is from Jamaica. My dad is from Trinidad and Tobago. And I've lived in Philly as well. I went to University of Pennsylvania for undergrad, and I've also lived in DC, and that's where I live now. I went to Howard Law for law school. So after law school, went back to New York, and now I'm back in DC, but I call all of them home in different regards.
Very good. No, I love that. And you are my first attorney who is coming on the show. So I'm a member of the tribe as well. So I love that.
Nice.
So we're closing out the season very nicely here. So
sounds good.
Now, when you think about some of your professional passions, what does that look like for you?
I think my main passion has always been helping people, like no matter what I've done in my career. So before law school, I worked at a nonprofit, and then I've been in education. I've obviously practiced the law as well. So one trend has definitely been helping people, and that's been a passion of mine. But another is educating people. That's really, really big for me, helping people and just like empowering people through education. Those are both of my passions, even now working with my clients to protect their brand. So those are my two, big passions throughout.
Very good. And we'll talk a little bit about your firm in just a moment. But prior to starting this new venture, tell us a little bit about your work journey and really what's worked well in the environments that you've been a part of.
Sure. So I'll start with post-law school. So right after law school, I clerked for a year. So I was working really closely with a judge. It was a super small team, like 4 people. And I was helping, draft opinions and things like that. And I really loved that because I got a lot of sort of ownership, and the judge really believed in my abilities, my capabilities. So I really loved that experience, and it was great to do right after law school. After that, I moved back to New York, and I started in big law, which I was super excited about. And while I was in big law, I had a chance to experience a variety of areas. So I did some work in the white collar industry. I did some work in civil litigation, commercial litigation, and intellectual property, which I ended up falling in love with. But even though I loved the work, I didn't get a ton of it while I was, at that first firm. And I wasn't loving my experience overall. So I ended up leaving big law the first time, and I started working at a law school in New York. I was director of academic success. So I was helping students across the board, but especially first year students, really get acclimated to law school and learn all the it's kind of like law school 101 to set you, get you on the right foot. And I like that a lot, but I didn't find it to be as intellectually stimulating, which I knew I needed. And so I started missing practice, which I didn't think I would, but I really started missing, the practice of law. So I figured, okay, let me give big law another shot. And so I returned to big law at a different firm, this time in DC. And I was getting great work. I really loved my teams, but there was still something missing, even in my second, big law bout. So that's some history about what led me to, where I am now. And also you asked about what's worked well. So I think a few things that have worked well at all of those places is really taking ownership of your work, also being proactive. I think those across the board, no matter what field I was in, those really worked well. Also like understanding your client, right? Because, like when I was, for example, in big law, of course, there's the client, but for the most part, if you're a junior attorney, you're working with senior attorneys, you're working with partners, and they're kind of the client in some regard. In the education space, the students are your client. So I think understanding your client and like recognizing their needs and being malleable enough to sort of like meet those needs. And I guess also like being open-minded is another thing that worked well in all of those environments.
No, that's really good to hear. So now I want to take you back a little bit, right? So obviously this show is a little bit about the Great Resignation, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But let's go back to March of 2020. Okay, so we're introduced to COVID right then and there, and so would love for you to talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected you.
Yeah, I mean, so the pandemic. I mean, I'm an introspective person naturally. But I think that the pandemic allowed me to slow down even more and be even more introspective and really think about what I wanted out of my life. I kind of already knew that big law wasn't for me, but I wasn't quite sure what I would do next. And so the pandemic was a chance for me to like really sit down, think about what I actually wanted and sort of like put myself first in that regard and think about my value system, what mattered to me. Because I think that with the pandemic, the first thing was that I realized like life is so short. And life is too short to spend the majority of your time doing something that you don't enjoy, that you don't love, or that really doesn't like give you that spark. And then the other thing is that with the pandemic, I realized that there's so much it's out of our control, but how we spend our time is within our control. And so that's really how it affected me. It allowed me to just be more introspective, be honest about what I wanted, my strengths and everything. And then also to really sort of like take more control of my career.
No, I think that's a great point, and so a lot of learnings it sounded like as you were going through that time. So now think about, so the pandemic is in full swing. It was, especially at that time. So how did it then start to affect your relationship with your job?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I kind of already had an inkling that, big law wasn't it. But as far as the relationship with my job, I really had to think about, like, I had to take a step back and say, like, okay, like, do I see myself, like thinking ahead, like, do I see myself being here for the long haul? And if I was honest with myself, the answer was no. And again, like when you think about, how short life is, I didn't want to be in a situation that I knew I didn't love it and I was just sticking around and I was starting to be really unhappy. And so that's at the point where I said, okay, like if this is not it, then what is it? Like, do I go to a smaller shop or do I, try to go in-house or work at a company or do I go work at an agency or do I do my own thing? And the whole like do my own thing idea, like that was something I thought I would do way, way, way in the future. Not anytime soon.
Right.
But the more I thought about it and the more I sort of like weighed the pros and cons, talked to people close to me, like my husband, I remember my husband realized like how unhappy I was. And he was kind of like, all right, Ash, like, what's it going to be? Because this is obviously not what you want to do. We have to think about something else. And so that really helped sort of like give me the impetus to start thinking a little bit more about what I wanted out of my career and ultimately to launch my own practice.
No, that's awesome to hear. And I think, we've had a few episodes where we've had, I've had a couple wives on who mentioned similar things. Like, look, they came home, they said, look, what do I need to do? And the husbands are like, you got to go, right? You got to get, right. You got to get out of this space. So kudos to the husbands out there being so supportive.
Shout out to the spouses. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And so do you think there was like a pivotal moment for you when you realized big law wasn't the space that you needed to be in? And if so, what was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent it was really when I was at my second firm and I still realized like it still wasn't clicking for me. Like it still was not bringing me joy, the type of joy that I wanted from my career. And at that point, I realized like, okay, like I've at this point worked in 2 different big law environments. I've tried a bunch of practice areas and I already knew like I was a mid-level. So I already knew what practice area I wanted to be sort of like at the forefront. And I recognized that as trademarks. And so I figured if I'm not having that experience here, I need to sort of like figure that out for myself and sort of, basically bring my own table, not even grab a seat at the table, get my own table and create that for myself. So I think it's kind of sort of like process of elimination and sort of like trial and error that led me to realize like at that second firm, like, maybe just big law just doesn't necessarily suit me. And at first that was really hard for me because I mean, big law, when you're a law student, like a lot of times it's like the coveted job, like that is the dream, and right, that's the goal. And so to reach that and then say like, wait, but I don't think I fit here. I don't think this is for me. At first, I kind of viewed it as like a failure. And then I just had to realize eventually, like, no, it's not a failure. It's just everyone's different. And so I'm going to gain my success somewhere else, or like there's somewhere else that's going to be a better fit for me. And that's totally fine. So I think when I realized what I was at that second firm.
Very nice. You kind of hung up your white shoes, if you will, right?
Yeah.
or white heels, I should say, right?
Exactly.
White heels. There we go. And so now, so I'm in the healthcare space now, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm very interested in and curious about is, so we were very obviously hectic during that time from a patient facing standpoint. I'm curious, how was it working in the law firm during the pandemic, and what were some of the things that you noticed during that time? Like, was volume up? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So, I mean, at first, no one knew what to expect, right? So I think at first people were just kind of like, okay, we're just going remote for a little bit. And then I think once people realized like, okay, we're in this for the long haul, I did notice like, yes, we were super busy. And I noticed that the few boundaries that existed sort of just like disappeared. So, in the past, like I used to use my commute on the train, I used to use it as my sort of like downtime. That's when I would read, or that's when I would like listen to my favorite podcasts. And I lost that. And it became, you wake up, you work, and then you sort of sneak a couple meals, and then you go from there. So that was a big change. It's just like not having any boundaries. Like I even heard some interesting stories. Not anything that didn't happen to me, but I heard interesting stories of people saying that like some partners that they worked with, they would say like, well, you have nowhere else to be but at work because there's a lockdown. And so we're just going to keep piling on the work. So I felt that like working in the law during the pandemic, it was tough because, there weren't as many boundaries. There wasn't much downtime, and there wasn't a chance to really like make time for yourself, for your mental and physical health. And I think that was really difficult for me and for a lot of associates at the time. So, and then I guess the other part is that I think a lot of associates at the time, they started to think about what they wanted for their careers, because especially in big law, there are a lot of perks, right? To being in big law. Of course, there's a salary, but there's also things like, cars to take you home, or like really great meals and fun 2-hour summer lunches and things like that. And all the perks were stripped away during the pandemic. So you were just left with your work. And so I think for a lot of people, it was a chance to say like, okay, like if it's just me and the work, how does that make me feel? Like, am I happy? Am I content? Like, I can't even see my colleagues, my friends in person anymore. Do I love what I'm doing? And so I think that was also a big shift in big law, in the big law space, because, no boundaries, or not as many personal boundaries. And then also sort of like, it's just you and the work, and sort of figuring out if you were happy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so now you were initially at a big firm for a couple of years. Like you said, you moved into education during the pandemic, right? Which must have been really interesting around that time, right? And then you came back into the space, right? And so that was around November 2020. And then ultimately, June 2021, keep me honest, it was June 2021, right? You decide, hey, look, enough is enough. So ultimately, why did you leave all these jobs during the pandemic?
So, I mean, the first one, I left the education job during the pandemic. Well, the first one I left because, like I said, when I was at the first firm, I was like, okay, I'm not happy. Like, this isn't it. And for a second, I wasn't even sure if I should be practicing law anymore. Like, I was just like, I felt so out of it that I was like, maybe I'm not meant to be an attorney. And so, and education, as I've mentioned, is a passion of mine. And so I figured, okay, let me explore this avenue. So I did that. But then, as I mentioned before, I was missing something. And then that something was practice. And so that's why I left education and went back to big law. But the reason I ultimately left the second firm in big law was, again, I felt that feeling of like unfulfillment and unhappiness. And again, I just felt that just wasn't it. And I talked to people who really loved their jobs. Like I was working with people who loved what they did so much. And I was kind of just going through the motions, and it just didn't feel right. And at that point, I knew what I wanted to do. Like I knew that I wanted to help small businesses with trademarks. Like I knew the type of client that I wanted to work with. I knew what I wanted my day to look like, and it just wasn't working. And I knew I had to make a change. And like I said, my husband, he was so encouraging, and he was like, Ashley, like, you can do this. Like, you have all the skills that you need to do this. My folks were so supportive. And so that's really what led me to sort of like take the leap. It was, I knew the type of work that I wanted. I knew the environment that I wanted. And I knew that there was a very slim chance that I would get that elsewhere. So I kind of had to create that for myself.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were very intentional in your process, right? And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about, how did you decide that this was going to be it?
Yeah.
And then what were some of the steps that you took in order to make this happen?
Yeah. The legal field is so vast. So I had to sort of think a bit about my strengths and play to those strengths. I also actually made a list of all of the tasks that I've had, the tasks that I really loved at both firms and also even in education, what I enjoyed doing, what made me feel good, and then the things that I really didn't enjoy and what didn't make me feel good. And I thought, okay, where can I get that experience? So thinking about my strengths, I did a little SWOT analysis, thought about my strengths, my weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And again, just made a list of pros and cons depending on, whatever the environment was. So I made a pros and cons for going out on my own, which is really scary and really traditionally not me because I'm very risk averse, but I made a pros and cons list. I made a pros and cons of okay, what if I applied to smaller firms, smaller trademark firms? Or what if I tried to go in-house? So I thought a lot about, my strengths. I also made my little list, but then I also talked to people. I talked to people sort of in the trademark space. I talked to some solo practitioners and got a sense of okay, if I'm going to join this community, what can I learn from them? I think that a lot of times, certain things, they seem super cool or exciting. And then you kind of hear the nitty gritty and you're like, I don't know if I want that, right? But in speaking to people, I realized yes, it's not going to be easy, but that's fine. I'm up for the challenge. And I guess the last thing was just really being honest with myself, because in finding my niche, I realized that even in my downtime, I was still gravitating toward trademarks. I was still setting Google alerts for intellectual property and trademarks and sort of geeking out on that stuff. So I think that, being honest with my strengths and also with my interests, and then speaking to people and really doing my research, that helped a ton.
No, that's awesome. And so now taking us back to that decision now. So now you've left the role, left the field, if you will. So how did it impact you, and really what has happened since you left?
Yeah, I mean, it's had a great impact on me. I mean, I've learned so much about myself since leaving. I've been in corporate America for the majority of my adult life. And so leaving, and I started my own practice. So that's a big thing that happened. But since leaving, I really have learned a ton about myself, and I realized I didn't have hobbies. I realized that my life just was sort of so enveloped by work and my career. And I realized that I wanted to be a more whole person. So I've been dabbling into hobbies. I'm learning to play piano again and things like that. But I've also learned a lot about, getting out of my comfort zone. I'm naturally an introvert, and being an introverted entrepreneur has its challenges. But at the same time, being a business owner, to be a successful business owner, you have to sort of push the boundaries of your comfort zone. So I've learned a lot about that, a lot about sort of trusting myself, because it is just me. I wear all the hats. So I have to trust myself through the process. And I also learned that some of the sort of habits that served me in big law or otherwise, they may not serve me here. So I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist. That can be a good thing, but it can also be really detrimental, especially when you're running your own business, because you realize there's no such thing as perfect. And so sometimes you just got to do it. Sometimes you just have to get out there, put yourself out there, see what works, see what doesn't work. And most times done is better than perfect. I still strive for excellence, but I think that I have learned to sort of differentiate between the two, between being excellent and striving for excellence versus, being perfect, whatever that is. So,
yeah. And I think that's great advice. That's some advice I take even from my own show, right? Because me trying to figure out any of these algorithms, it's never going to happen.
It won't happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I too, I want to put out a good show. Quality's
Yep.
good. The visual's good. And we'll go from there.
Yes,
Right. So I
exactly.
love that. I love that.
Yes.
So now we've talked about it a couple times, Bince Law, right? So tell us more about your firm and your focus.
Sure. So it's a virtual law firm that helps small business owners protect their brands through trademarks. So protecting everything from like your brand name to your logo. And it's also, we focus on mission driven companies. So I'm really passionate, not just about helping people and working with people, but also people who really have a vision, who want to sort of like make the world better in some way. And so I work with these clients. I think I have the best clients in the world, but I work with small business owners. I help sort of empower them through education. And I also help them protect their brands through trademark registration, maintenance, trademark licensing, and all of those things. And I really love it because business owners pour so much into their work. It's kind of like, that's like your baby. And I want to make sure that they have the protection that they need to have a sustainable business and a long-term business, and not have anyone interfere with sort of like taking their brand name or anything like that. So that's what I do. And I really enjoy working with my clients.
No, that's awesome. And, in thinking about some of the things that some of the people I've been talking with on the show, we've talked with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so so one thing, I think maybe we want to bring you back, right? For when we talk about the do's and don'ts when setting up your business, and from an IP standpoint, we want to have you bring you back and we can talk a little bit more about that. But initially, for those who are thinking about starting their own business right now, what would you say, what should they be focusing on first to protect their intellectual property?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing that you can do is like, once you think of that really cool name for your business, I would say do a quick Google search. See if there's anyone out there using the same name or a similar one in the same or similar industry, because that's the time for you to change, to rebrand and change your name. Rebranding can be really, really, really costly. And it can also take like an emotional toll on you once you become really connected to a name. So I always say do a quick Google search. And that's the point at which you should consider, rebranding. Also check the Secretary of State website for your state. That's another place where you can see sort of names of other companies that might be, the same as yours, and hire an attorney early. I know a lot of times, entrepreneurs will say like, I don't have the money for that, but the amount of money that you can save from sort of like getting all of that done by a professional early on, it will save you a lot of money on the back end. Another thing is to secure your domain name early. So like once you sort of like get the clearance on the name through, your attorney, I would say go ahead and secure the domain name. It can be really expensive to get a domain name, especially after the fact. So like say you started building your business and someone else takes it and you have to then pay them a fee, that can get really costly. So securing the domain name, also securing the name on social media handles, like even if you're not on TikTok yet, still go ahead and secure that handle, because it's really great to have, right? Because it's really great to have like consistency throughout, so that you're not Bince Law on one platform and Bince.law on another, right? So it's really important to sort of like have that consistency. And then I would also say when you're working with an attorney, make sure you have your contracts in place. I've heard a lot of crazy stories about people like they're building really, really awesome brands and they don't have the right contracts in place that protect the business. And then they end up, losing everything. So definitely getting the contracts in place as well. So those are some tips that I would say. And I guess the last one I would also say is, of course, like forming an entity. So like, of course, like I can hold myself out as, a business owner, and I can be like a sole proprietorship. But when you form certain entities, you can get some protection from your personal assets. So like forming the LLC or the corporation or whatever works for the type of business that you plan to have.
No, absolutely. And now when you think, a part of the show, we also talk about advice for some of the listeners, right? Yeah. And so when you think about folks who may be in a similar experience, whether in the legal field or otherwise, but they feel maybe they're kind of stuck and they don't know what to do next. What type of advice would you give to them in this situation if they're looking for better outcomes?
I mean, I think the first thing would be, being honest with yourself about, what you want, as well as your strengths, your areas room for improvement. I think that if I had been honest with myself, I probably would have known that like big law wouldn't be for me because I thrive in smaller environments. I've always been like that. And so I think, being honest with yourself and also talking to people, reach out to your community, like whether it's someone you went to school with, someone who's doing something that you think you want to do, someone who's working in an area that you're curious about. Like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. For them, usually, if you ask someone for like 15 minutes of their time, chances are they will say yes. So reach out to people, get a sense of like what they do on a day-to-day basis and see if it's sort of like in line with what you want. I also mentioned before, like really sitting down and thinking about what is the type of like life that I envision and what career or what sort of opportunities will sort of like lend to that life, to that lifestyle, or like what's actually going to make me happy, and really, really follow that. So those are some tips that I would say would help. And I think also the whole personal SWOT analysis, I really stand by that. I think it really, really helps. It really, really helps when you're trying to figure out, what's next.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And now what more do you think firms could be doing to better support attorneys during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things that can be done, but I think the first thing is mental health, and like really taking mental health seriously. I think that starts even before you're at the firm, or whether, before you're a practicing attorney. I think that needs to start in law school and even before then. So, because as you go through your career, it's not going to get any easier, right? You're going to have more responsibilities, obligations. And so I think that firms really should take mental health seriously. Don't frown upon people, needing to take a break, whether it's leave, etc. And even, I mean, when someone is up for like partnership, for example, it shouldn't be like, well, is this person really committed to the firm if they took a leave or something, and I think that happens a lot of times. And so I think that definitely showing that mental health is a priority and not just a buzz term. I think that needs to happen for sure with firms. And another thing is, as a Black woman who was in big law, I think that, diversity, like DEI, is another sort of buzz term that we've heard a lot of in the past few years, especially. And I think that another thing that firms can do is really pour into its associates, its diverse associates, all of its associates, because I think that the attrition rates for attorneys of color and women, they're abysmal in big law. And I think that firms really need to, take that seriously. And it needs to be a sort of like top-down commitment to diversity and really figuring out like, what are we missing here? What are we doing wrong here? So I think the two big things that firms can do right now are really taking mental health and diversity initiatives as more than just initiatives, right? And like really try to make that part of the fabric of the firm.
No, I agree. I like that. And now as you focus on, I know we're coming up to a milestone here, right? So it's almost been a year since Bince Law launched, right? So I don't have any nice audibles, but I'm just going to I'm giving you a round of applause here, right? So what impact are you hoping to have in this next phase of your professional career?
I mean, I think the first thing is helping more business owners, getting more clients and helping them protect their brands and solidify their legacies, quite frankly, but also just educating entrepreneurs more about trademarks. A lot of times it's like, you don't know what you don't know. and so I want to make sure that I am sort of like empowering small business owners through education, because like I said, I've just seen so many stories of just things that could have been avoidable if small business owners sort of like knew what they needed to do. And I want to work on helping small business owners be, more proactive instead of reactive, especially when it comes to brand protection and trademarks. And I think lastly is just, letting people know that there isn't just one path if you go to law school, right? Like, I think that a lot of times, like we think of like just certain areas of the law, but the legal field is so vast. And it's okay to change your mind, and it's not viewed, you shouldn't view yourself as like, oh, I'm a failure, I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that. It's like, it's okay. There's so many areas within the law, and you'll find something you really enjoy. And if you don't, you can do something else. So that's something that I also really want to sort of like portray to people, and like part of the impact that I hope to have for people who are either in law school or thinking about law school, or even people who are already working, to show that like, you're not stuck in a place, like you have control over your career and you can do something else and really find fulfillment.
And, let me tell you that hits really close to home for me because my career, I always joke around and say my career took the scenic route. Right. And so, I wanted to be an agent initially, then I was going to be, an M&A attorney. And then I ended up in employment law. And now I was in HR, then I moved to healthcare. I mean, we can do anything. Right. Yep. And so I think that is really, really good advice. So Ashley, look, this was a really great discussion. I enjoyed learning about your journey and this transition in your life, right? I'm really proud to hear what you accomplished so far.
Thank you.
I look forward to following your work, and hopefully we can get you back on here again if we're talking about some business related things, because I think there's some key information there that people need to know about. So where can folks support you and find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Ashley Bince. I also have a Bince Law page on LinkedIn. And I'm also Bince Law on all platforms, mostly though LinkedIn and Instagram. And my website is www.bincelaw.com.
All right, great. So I'll make sure I'll put that information in the show notes.
Thank you.
And look, all right. So that's going to do it for today's episode. And you know what? It's going to conclude the first season of Why I Left. So
Congrats.
What a journey thank you. This has been a heck of a journey, right? And I hope you all have enjoyed the show. Ashley, I'm very thankful that you entrusted me to highlight your story. And I appreciate you rounding off season 1 with an attorney's point of view.
Thank
right?
you, Ryan.
Because these times, these times have hit a lot of industries hard. And so I'm really working to touch as many folks as I can and just get as many stories. So look, I hope everyone has a great week. We'll see you in April. We'll be back for season 2. That's right. We'll be back for season 2. And so I want to thank you all again. Ashley, thank you. And I hope you have a great week.
Thank you. You too, Brian.
Hello. Thank you for listening to season 1 of Why I Left. The support for the show has been amazing, and I'm truly humbled by all the well wishes and positive messages that I receive about the content. We'll be back in April of 2023 for season 2, and we have some great things in store for you all. But in the meantime, you can catch up on season 1, write a review about the show on Apple Podcasts, and definitely continue to spread the word about the show to your community. Visit us online at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next season. The Great Resignation, people leaving their jobs in droves. There's a lot of buzz happening in the job market of late. Now, did you or someone you know leave your job during the pandemic and want to share your story? We've been having some really good conversations in this space, so if you're interested, I'd love to have you join the program. If so, here's how you can do it. First, you can email us at hello@whyileft.co. That's hello@whyileft.co, or visit us online at whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. Look forward to having you join the conversation. Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.